Welcome to a documentary experience defined by absolute transparency. We guarantee that the upcoming scenes are entirely unfiltered and unedited. This is raw, immersive footage from the front lines of justice, providing an unpolished look at those who uphold the law.
Officer, my son is in the back seat. He is 4 years old and he is very sick. I am a registered nurse. I know what I am looking at. Please, I just need you to run my information quickly so I can get him to the hospital, please.
Ma'am, I clocked you doing 52 and a 45. I'm going to run your information and you're going to sit tight until I'm done.
He told her to calm down. He told her the hospital wasn't going anywhere. He told her that if she kept raising her voice, he would make things very difficult for her. And then he went back to his patrol car and took his time. Officer Brendan Tully had been doing this for 11 years, and not one person had ever made him pay for it. That night on Callaway Bridge Road, with vomit on the back seat and a child going silent, he met the one woman who would. What Brendan Tully didn't know was that she was already building the case that would end him. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe that no mother should ever have to beg a police officer to save her child's life, hit that like button and subscribe to Bodycam Revealed, because stories like this one need to be heard. It was a Tuesday night in late October when Soraya Mensah's entire world collapsed. Not in the hospital, not at a doctor's office, but on a dark two-lane stretch of Callaway Bridge Road outside Augusta, Georgia at 11:47 p.m., held in place by a man with a badge and absolutely no intention of moving quickly for her. Soraya was 31 years old. She had spent the last 6 years working as a registered nurse at Piedmont Augusta Hospital on Dias Parkway, the same hospital she was now desperately trying to reach. She worked the overnight trauma unit. She had held the hands of strangers in their worst moments. She knew what a medical emergency looked like, sounded like, smelled like. She had been trained to identify deterioration in a patient's condition within seconds. She knew how fast things could turn. That knowledge, that experience, all of it was screaming at her from the moment she had lifted 4-year-old Jalen from his bedroom floor 2 hours earlier. His small body shaking, his lips dry, his temperature reading 104.7 on the bathroom thermometer she had grabbed off the shelf with trembling hands. Jalen was her only child. She called him her little serious man because even as a toddler, he rarely smiled without a reason. But when he did, it took over his whole face, his eyes squinting shut, his head tilting back. He had his mother's dark brown complexion and a gap between his 2 front teeth that the pediatric dentist had assured Soraya would close on its own by age 6. He had been running a low fever since Sunday. His pediatrician, Dr. Anita Osebonsu at the Children's Wellness Clinic on Wheeler Road, had seen him Monday morning and told Soraya to monitor his fluids and return if the fever climbed or if he stopped keeping food down. By Tuesday evening, he had stopped doing both. Soraya had given him children's Tylenol at 9 p.m. By 10:30, he had vomited 3 times. By 11:15, when she lifted him and he didn't resist. When his body folded into her with none of the usual squirming or fussing. She knew. She didn't hesitate. She wrapped him in his green fleece blanket, strapped him into his car seat in the back of her 2019 Nissan Rogue, and pulled out of the driveway of her townhouse on Barrington Oaks Lane, doing exactly what any mother trained in emergency medicine would do. She drove. Callaway Bridge Road was the fastest route to Piedmont Augusta from her side of town. A fact she knew not just as a resident, but as a nurse who had made the same drive in her own car dozens of times after late shifts. It cut through a stretch of unincorporated county land, past the grain processing facility at the end of Whitmore Industrial Parkway, past the shuttered Dollar General on the corner of Route 56, and then straight across the Callaway Creek Bridge before connecting to Dias Parkway less than 2 miles from the hospital's emergency entrance. At midnight on a Tuesday, the road was almost completely empty. Soraya was doing 52 miles per hour in a 45 zone. Not reckless, not erratic, but urgent. When the blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror, she pulled over immediately. She did not hesitate, did not attempt to continue driving, did not try to reach the hospital first. She pulled onto the gravel shoulder just past the bridge, put the car in park, turned on her interior light, and had her license and registration in her hand before the patrol car had even fully stopped behind her. She was doing everything right. She would later say that in that moment that she told herself, "Just be calm, explain it clearly, and he will let you go. He has to let you go." Officer Brendan Tully had been with the Columbia County Sheriff's Department for 11 years. He was 44 years old, broad-shouldered, and had a habit that his colleagues had quietly noted over the years, a particular slowness that seemed to appear most often during stops involving black drivers on the county roads after dark. He had received formal commendations twice, once for assisting at a vehicle fire on Interstate 20 in 2017, and once for recovering a stolen ATV in 2021. He had also received 7 written complaints in that same 11-year period, 5 of which involved allegations of discriminatory conduct during traffic stops. All 5 had been reviewed internally. None had resulted in disciplinary action beyond a notation in his file. He approached Soraya's driver's side window with his flashlight in his left hand and his right thumb hooked into his belt. He was not rushing. "License and registration?" he said before she had even finished rolling the window down. She handed both to him immediately and began speaking. "Officer, I need you to know. My son is in the back seat. He's 4 years old and he's very sick. I'm a nurse at Piedmont Augusta. I need to get him to the emergency room right now. I was speeding, I understand that, but please, if you could just run my information quickly, I need to go." Tully shone his flashlight into the back seat. Jalen was visible, wrapped in his green blanket, eyes half open, his small chest rising and falling with a labored, irregular rhythm that any trained observer would have recognized as distress. The interior of the car smelled strongly of vomit. An open box of children's wipes sat on the back seat beside a plastic bag tied shut. The evidence of what Soraya was telling him was not subtle. It was everywhere. Tully looked at the back seat for approximately 3 seconds. Then he looked back at Soraya's license. "Ma'am, I clocked you at 52 in a 45. I'm going to need to run your information. Sit tight." "Please," Soraya said. Her voice cracked on the word. "Please. He is getting worse. I work in the trauma unit. I know what I'm looking at. He needs to be seen right now." "Ma'am." His voice dropped half a register. Not louder, but harder. "I said sit tight. If you keep escalating this, I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the vehicle, and that's going to take a lot longer. Do you understand me?" She understood him perfectly. She turned back to face the windshield, both hands visible on the steering wheel, and she began to pray under her breath. In the back seat, Jalen made a small sound. Not crying, something quieter than that. And then went still again. Tully walked back to his patrol car. He did not run her plates once. According to the body camera footage that would later become the centerpiece of a federal lawsuit, he ran her information 3 separate times over the course of the next 47 minutes, pausing between each one to make a personal call, finish a convenience store coffee that had been sitting in his cup holder, and complete his incident log at a pace that his own department's response time records would later prove was nearly 4 times slower than his documented average for routine traffic stops. Soraya turned around to check on Jalen 11 times in those 47 minutes. The body camera captured every one. By the time Tully returned to her window with her license and a written warning, not even a ticket, a warning, Jalen had stopped responding to the sound of her voice. She didn't wait for Tully to finish speaking. She took her license, put the car in drive, and covered the remaining 1.8 miles to Piedmont Augusta's emergency entrance in under 3 minutes. She was out of the car before it had fully stopped, Jalen in her arms, running through the sliding glass doors of the ER she had walked through 1,000 times. Except this time, she was on the wrong side of everything. The triage nurse recognized her. The attending on duty recognized her. Everyone who saw her face that night would later say the same thing. They had never seen Soraya Mensah look like that. Not in 6 years. The team worked on Jalen for 22 minutes. It was not enough. Soraya Mensah did not sleep that night. She did not sleep the night after that either. She sat in the same chair in the corner of her bedroom for 2 days, still wearing the clothes she had on when she carried Jalen through those emergency room doors, and she stared at the green fleece blanket she had folded and placed on the foot of his bed because she could not bring herself to put it anywhere else. The grief was total. It covered everything. But underneath it, from the very first morning, something else was growing. Quiet, steady, and completely determined. On the third day, she got up, opened her laptop, and started writing. She wrote down every single detail she could remember about the stop. The time she was pulled over, 11:47 p.m., confirmed by her phone's call log because she had attempted to dial 911 before thinking better of it and lowering the phone. The time Tully returned to her window, 12:34 a.m., which she knew because she had looked at the dashboard clock the moment he handed back her license. She wrote down his exact words. She wrote down the 3 times she begged him to let her go. She wrote down the way he looked into the back seat, saw Jalen, and walked away anyway. She wrote down the personal call. She wrote down the coffee cup she had watched him finish through her rearview mirror. She wrote down everything, and when she was done, she printed it, signed it, and dated it. Then she called the Columbia County Sheriff's Department and filed a formal complaint. The woman who took her call was polite. She was given a complaint number and told that someone from the Internal Affairs Division would be in contact within 10 business days. Soraya thanked her, hung up the phone, and then called the one person she knew would not tell her to wait. Her older sister, Denise, arrived at the townhouse on Barrington Oaks Lane within the hour. Denise was not a lawyer, but she worked as a paralegal at a civil rights firm in Atlanta, and she had spent enough years around litigation to know exactly what her sister was going to need. She walked in, sat across from Soraya at the kitchen table, and listened to the whole story without interrupting. When Soraya finished, Denise asked one question. She asked whether there had been a body camera on Tully's uniform. Soraya said she didn't know for certain, but that every officer in the county had been required to wear one since 2020 under a department-wide policy update. Denise nodded slowly. Then she picked up her own phone and called her supervising attorney in Atlanta. That attorney's name was Roland Greer. He had handled police misconduct cases for 19 years. When Denise explained the situation, he told her he would clear his schedule for the following morning and drive to Augusta himself. He arrived at 9 a.m. with a yellow legal pad and a digital recorder, and he sat with Soraya for 3 hours. By the time he left, he had enough to begin drafting a formal public records request for the body camera footage from Tully's unit on the night of October 22nd. The department's legal office acknowledged the request 7 days later. They had 30 days under Georgia's Open Records Act to respond. Roland Greer filed the paperwork on day 1 and began counting. While they waited, Soraya went back to work. This surprised people. Her nurse manager had called twice to tell her to take as much time as she needed, and her colleagues had left food at her door and sent messages she hadn't yet found the energy to answer. But Soraya returned to Piedmont Augusta 11 days after Jalen died, because she said the only thing worse than being in that building was sitting still. She walked through those same sliding glass doors, put on her badge, and went back to the trauma unit. And every single person who worked with her understood immediately that she was not the same woman who had left. She was quieter. She moved through her shifts with a focus that was almost unsettling. She was doing her job, but she was also doing something else at the same time, and everyone could feel it. What they didn't know was that she had started talking to other people. Not publicly, not yet, but carefully and deliberately. She had begun reaching out to other Black residents in Columbia County who had been stopped by officers on those same county roads after dark. She wasn't asking them to do anything. She was just listening. And the more she listened, the more a pattern began to take shape that went well beyond one traffic stop on one Tuesday night. 3 people she spoke to had been stopped by Tully specifically. One was a man named Gerald, a 47-year-old electrician who had been held on the shoulder of Route 56 for over 30 minutes, while Tully ran his information repeatedly despite a completely clean record. Another was a woman named Priya, who had been stopped on Whitmore Industrial Parkway late on a Friday and told to get out of her vehicle for a reason she still could not explain, before being let go without any citation. The third was a 19-year-old college student named Marcus, who had been stopped twice in the same month, on the same road, by the same officer, and who had never once been given a reason that made sense. None of them had filed formal complaints. All of them, when Soraya asked why, gave versions of the same answer. They didn't think it would go anywhere. They didn't think anyone would listen. Soraya told each of them that she was listening, and she asked whether they would be willing to put what happened to them in writing. All three said yes. On day 29 of the 30-day window, the Columbia County Sheriff's Department released the body camera footage from Officer Brendan Tully's unit for the night of October 22nd. Roland Greer received the file at 4:17 p.m. on a Thursday. He drove to Augusta that same evening, set up his laptop on Soraya's kitchen table, and played the footage while she sat across from him. She watched the whole thing without speaking. She watched herself handing over her license. She watched herself pleading. She watched Tully shine his flashlight on Jalen, look at him for 3 seconds, and walk away. She watched him sit in his patrol car. She watched him make the phone call. She watched herself turning around to check on Jalen 11 times. She watched the timestamp in the corner of the footage moving with a slowness that felt obscene. And when it was over, when Tully finally appeared back at her window at 12:34 a.m. and handed back her license, she watched herself pull away. And she watched the timestamp, and she did the math that she had already done 100 times in her head, and it came out the same way it always did. 47 minutes. The doctors at Piedmont Augusta had told her in careful and compassionate language that Jalen's condition had progressed to the point where earlier intervention, even 10 minutes earlier, would have given them a significantly better chance. 47 minutes, not 10. 47. Roland Greer closed the laptop and looked at her. He told her the footage was exactly what they needed. He told her the case was strong. He told her they were ready to move forward if she was. Soraya looked at the green fleece blanket still sitting on the foot of Jalen's bed, visible through the open door at the end of the hallway. Then she looked back at Roland Greer and told him she was ready. The lawsuit was filed the following Monday morning in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Georgia. It named Officer Brendan Tully and the Columbia County Sheriff's Department as defendants. The filing was 43 pages long. It included Soraya's written account, the body camera footage, the medical records from Piedmont Augusta, the statements from Gerald, Priya, and Marcus, and a timeline so precise and so damning that Roland Greer's supervising partner back in Atlanta, when she read the draft the night before, had only one thing to say. She said, "This one isn't going to settle quietly." The Columbia County Sheriff's Department released a one-paragraph statement 2 days after the lawsuit was filed. It said the department took all complaints seriously, that Officer Tully remained on active duty pending an internal review, and that it would be inappropriate to comment further on ongoing litigation. It was the kind of statement that said nothing while sounding like something, and most people who read it moved on. Roland Greer did not move on. He had requested Tully's full personnel file as part of the discovery process, and when that file arrived, 214 pages, delivered in a sealed envelope to his Atlanta office on a Wednesday morning. He cleared the rest of his day and read every single page. By early afternoon, he had stopped taking notes and started making calls. What was in that file was not a surprise to everyone, but documented in black and white, in the department's own language, on the department's own letterhead, it was something else entirely. It was proof. Brendan Tully had been the subject of 11 formal complaints during his 11 years with the department. Not 7, as earlier records had suggested, 11. 4 of them had never been entered into the main disciplinary database. They existed only in the paper file, buried between performance evaluations and training certificates, in a section of the folder that had no label. 3 of those 4 hidden complaints described the same pattern. A black driver stopped late at night on a county road, held far longer than the stop required, and released without explanation. In 2 of those cases, the drivers had specifically written that Tully ignored their stated emergencies. One complainant, a woman named Tasha Brewer, had written in her 2019 complaint that she had told Tully her husband was having a cardiac episode at home and she needed to get there. She wrote that Tully told her to lower her voice, return to his patrol car, and kept her on the shoulder of Hargrove Mill Road for 38 minutes before letting her go. Her husband survived. She had filed the complaint 3 days later, received a confirmation number, and never heard from the department again. Her complaint had never been investigated. There was no review record attached to it, no interviewer's notes, no resolution memo, just the original 2-page handwritten statement, paperclipped to nothing, sitting in a folder that should never have existed. Roland Greer put that complaint on top of the pile and kept reading. Of the 11 total complaints, 8 involved black drivers. 7 of those 8 involved stops that occurred between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. on rural county roads. In 6 of the 7, Tully had held the driver for more than 20 minutes with no arrest, no citation that held up, and no documented justification for the length of the stop. The department had formally investigated 3 of the 11 complaints. All 3 had been closed with the same language: insufficient evidence to support a finding of misconduct. In 2 of those 3 cases, the investigating officer was a man named Sergeant Dennis Lofton, Tully's direct supervisor and, according to a 2018 department directory still sitting in the file, his former academy roommate. That detail alone stopped Roland Greer cold for a long moment. He then turned to the section of the file that covered Tully's body camera compliance history. Every officer in the department was required under the 2020 policy to activate their camera at the beginning of every traffic stop. The compliance log showed that between January 2021 and October of this year, Tully had filed 43 incident reports involving traffic stops. Body camera footage existed for 31 of them. For the remaining 12, the log listed the same notation each time: equipment malfunction, footage unavailable. 12 times in less than 3 years. The department average for camera malfunctions across all officers in the same period was 1.4 per officer. Tully's number was more than 8 times that average, and not one of those 12 incidents had triggered a review or an equipment audit. Not one. When the lawsuit became public and local news outlets in Augusta began covering it, a reporter at the Augusta Courier named Deb Whitfield started pulling public records of her own. She filed 7 separate open records requests in 10 days. What she found added another layer to what Roland Greer had already uncovered. Between 2018 and 2023, the Columbia County Sheriff's Department had paid out 4 civil settlements involving complaints against officers on patrol. None of the 4 had been disclosed in any public report or annual review document the department had released during that period. The total amount paid across the 4 settlements was just over $340,000 in county funds. Taxpayer money, paid quietly, with no press release, no policy change, and no public acknowledgement that any of it had ever happened. 2 of the 4 settlements had involved Officer Brendan Tully. Deb Whitfield published her findings on a Thursday. By Friday morning, the story had been picked up by 3 Atlanta television stations. By Saturday, it was national. The detail that spread fastest was not the settlements. It was not the hidden complaints. It was Tasha Brewer's 2019 statement, the woman who had told Tully her husband was dying at home and been held on the side of the road for 38 minutes anyway. When Tasha Brewer saw her own words quoted in the Augusta Courier on Friday morning, she called the paper, confirmed she was the complainant, and agreed to speak on camera. She sat in front of a local news crew that same afternoon, held up the confirmation number she had saved in her phone for 4 years, and said plainly that she had never received a single follow-up call from the department. Not one. In 4 years. That interview ran on every major outlet that had picked up the story. Roland Greer filed a motion 2 days later, requesting that the court compel the department to produce all internal communications related to the 4 hidden complaints. He also formally requested the complete body camera archives for all 12 stops where Tully had logged equipment malfunctions. The department's legal team objected on both counts. The judge overruled them on both counts, the same afternoon, without requesting additional briefing. The department had spent 11 years deciding that Brendan Tully was not a problem worth solving. A federal judge had just decided otherwise. And Soraya Mensah, sitting at her kitchen table when Roland Greer called to tell her, said nothing for a moment. Then she asked one question. She asked whether Tully was still on duty. He was. As of that morning, he was still wearing the badge. She said, "That ends next." The Columbia County Sheriff's Department suspended Brendan Tully with pay on a Monday morning. They did it quietly. No press conference, no statement beyond a single sentence emailed to local outlets at 6 a.m. before most people were awake. The timing was deliberate. They were hoping it would land softly. It did not. By noon that same day, protesters had gathered outside the department's main building on William Few Parkway. It was not a massive crowd. Maybe 60 people at first, but they were organized, they were loud, and several of them were holding printed copies of Tasha Brewer's complaint. By 3 p.m., the crowd had doubled. By evening, cars were backed up on both sides of the street and news vans had taken every available parking spot within 2 blocks. A 17-year-old girl held a sign that had Jalen's name on it and nothing else. That image was photographed by a wire service and published in over 40 outlets before midnight. The suspension with pay lasted 4 days. On Friday of that same week, under pressure from the county commissioner's office and a formal letter signed by 14 Georgia state legislators, the department announced that Tully had been terminated. The official language said his conduct was found to be inconsistent with department standards and the values of the Columbia County Sheriff's Office. Roland Greer read that statement to Soraya over the phone. She listened to the whole thing and then said that a man keeping a dying child on the side of a road for 47 minutes was a little more than inconsistent with department standards. Roland told her she was right. Then he told her they were not finished. The federal lawsuit moved faster than most cases of its kind. The reason was the evidence. There was simply too much of it, and it was too clean. The body camera footage alone told a story that required no interpretation. Add the hidden complaints, the settlements, the compliance records, the Tasha Brewer interview, and the fact that Sergeant Dennis Lofton had personally closed 2 investigations into his own academy roommate. And the department's legal position became very difficult to defend. 3 months after the lawsuit was filed, the county's legal team approached Roland Greer about a settlement. He told them Soraya would hear their number, but that she was also pursuing a consent decree, which meant structural changes to how the department operated. Not just a check. The county did not love that. Roland told them that was not his problem. The settlement was reached 5 months after Jalen died. The county agreed to pay Soraya $2.1 million. They also agreed to a consent decree that required the department to implement mandatory bias training, establish an independent civilian oversight board with real authority to review complaints, and submit all body camera compliance records to that board on a quarterly basis. Every complaint filed against any officer would now be logged in a central system accessible to the oversight board, meaning no more paper files buried in unlabeled folders, and no more complaints that disappeared into silence. Sergeant Dennis Lofton retired 2 weeks before the consent decree was finalized. The department did not hold a ceremony. Tully himself faced consequences beyond termination. The Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, which certifies law enforcement officers across the state, opened its own review following the federal court proceedings. Based on the documented pattern of conduct in his personnel file and the body camera footage from October 22nd, his certification was permanently revoked. Brendan Tully could not serve as a law enforcement officer anywhere in the state of Georgia, ever again. He did not make a public statement. His attorney released 3 sentences saying Tully maintained that he had followed proper procedure during the stop and that the outcome was a tragedy he had not caused. Roland Greer responded in a press availability the following morning by playing 30 seconds of the body camera footage on a laptop set up at a podium outside the federal courthouse on Telfair Street. He did not add any commentary. He let the footage speak, and then he thanked the press for their time and walked back inside. Nationally, the story had already moved well beyond Augusta. A Senate subcommittee cited the case during a hearing on law enforcement accountability. 2 other states announced reviews of their own body camera compliance policies directly in response to what had been found in Tully's records. A nonprofit legal organization in Washington used the consent decree as a model document in its published guide for civil rights attorneys pursuing systemic police reform. The case had a name in those circles now. People were calling it the Mensa case, and they were referencing it the way lawyers reference things that matter. As a precedent, as a standard, as proof that the fight was worth having. Soraya returned to her shift at Piedmont Augusta the week after the settlement was announced. She walked through the same sliding glass doors, put on the same badge, and went back to the trauma unit. Her colleagues had put a small framed photo of Jalen at the nurse's station. Just his face, that gap-toothed smile, his eyes squinting shut the way they did when something made him genuinely happy. Soraya had approved it. She said she wanted him somewhere that people were still being saved. She still lives in the townhouse on Barrington Oaks Lane. The green fleece blanket is still on the foot of his bed. She has said in the months since that she does not plan to move it. She said Jalen picked that blanket out himself at a store on Washington Road when he was 2 years old, pointing at it from the cart with complete certainty, the way small children sometimes know exactly what they want. She said it still smells like him if she doesn't wash it, so she doesn't wash it. Brendan Tully had 11 years and 11 complaints and a department that looked the other way every single time. He stood at a car window, looked at a sick 4-year-old boy, and walked away. He thought that was the end of it. Soraya Mensah made sure it was only the beginning. Jalen was 4 years old. He deserved to turn 5. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every view, every share, and every comment keeps stories like Jalen's alive, and keeps the pressure on the systems that would rather we forgot. Hit the like button, and if you're new here, welcome to Bodycam Revealed, where the camera never lies and silence is never an option.
Driven by the pursuit of truth, our mission is to demand transparency and hold power to account. We trust in hard evidence because the records do not lie. Thank you for watching and staying informed.